Welcome, my friends. Come hear the tale of sinister occult rituals in the Red Hook area of Brooklyn, New York. We follow the investigations of Thomas Malone, a police detective who is investigating the mysterious and reclusive Robert Thedunwichhorror and his dark and insidious activities. As he delves deeper, Malone uncovers a cult performing hideous rituals involving human sacrifice. Risking his life and sanity, Malone heads into the decrepit and decaying old brick buildings of Red Hook to confront the cult with horrific side effects that change his life forever. All in the horror at Red Hook. Link to episode 1 above. In part 1, we meet Detective Thomas Malone and learn about the dark occurrences in the underworld of the Red Hook area. Come sit and watch as it is time to enter the Cave of Chronicles. The nightmare horde slithered away, led by the abominable, naked, phosphorescent thing that now strode insolently, bearing in his arms the glassy-eyed corpse of the corpulent old man. There are sacraments of evil as well as of good about us, and we live and move, to my belief, in an unknown world, a place where there are caves and shadows and dwellers in twilight. It is possible that man may sometimes return on the track of evolution, and it is my belief that an awful law is not yet dead. Arthur Machen. Not many weeks ago, on a street corner in the village of Pascoag, Rhode Island, a tall, heavily built and wholesome-looking pedestrian furnished much speculation by a singular lapse of behaviour. He had, it appears, been descending the hill by the road from Chepachet, and, encountering the compact section, had turned to his left into the main thoroughfare, where several modest business blocks convey a touch of the urbane. At this point, without visible provocation, he committed his astonishing lapse, staring queerly for a second at the tallest of the buildings before him, and then, with a series of terrified, hysterical shrieks, breaking into a frantic run, which ended in a stumble and a fall at the next crossing. Picked up and dusted off by ready hands, he was found to be conscious, organically unhurt, and evidently cured of his sudden nervous attack. He muttered some shame-faced explanations involving a strain he had undergone, and with a downcast glance turned back up the Chepachet road, trudging out of sight without once looking behind him. It was a strange incident to befall so large, robust, normal-featured and capable-looking a man, and the strangeness was not lessened by the remarks of a bystander who had recognised him as the boarder of a well-known dairyman on the outskirts of Chepachet. He was, it developed, a New York police detective named Thomas F. Malone, now on a long leave of absence under medical treatment after some disproportionately arduous work on a gruesome local case which accident had made dramatic. There had been a collapse of several old brick buildings during a raid in which he had shared, and something about the wholesale loss of life, both of prisoners and of his companions had peculiarly appalled him. As a result, he had acquired an acute and anomalous horror of any buildings even remotely suggesting the ones which had fallen in. So much that in the end, the mental specialists forbade him the sight of such things for an indefinite period. A police surgeon with relatives in Chapachet had put forward that quaint hamlet of wooden colonial houses as an ideal spot for the psychological convalescents, and thither the sufferer had gone, promising never to venture amongst the brick-lined streets of larger villages till duly advised by the wound socket specialist with whom he was put in touch. This walk to Pascoag for magazines had been a mistake, and the patient had paid in fright, bruises and humiliation for his disobedience. So much the gossips of Chapachet and Pascoag knew, and so much also the most learned specialists believed. But Malone had first told the specialist much more, ceasing only when he saw that utter incredulity was his portion. Thereafter he held his peace, protesting not at all when it was generally agreed that the collapse of certain squalid brick houses in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn and the consequent death of many brave officers had unseated his nervous equilibrium. He had worked too hard, all said, in trying to clean up those nests of disorder and violence. Certain features were shocking enough in all consequence, and unexpected tragedy was the last straw. This was a simple explanation which everyone could understand, and because Malone was not a simple person, he perceived that he had better let it suffice. To hint to unimaginative people of a horror beyond all human conception, a horror of houses and blocks and cities leprous and cancerous with evil dragged from elder worlds, would be merely to invite a padded cell instead of a restful rustication, and Malone was a man of sense despite his mysticism. He had the Celt's far vision of weird and hidden things, but the logician's quick eye for the outwardly unconvincing, an amalgam which had led him far afield in the 42 years of his life, and set him in strange places for a Dublin University man, born in a Georgian villa near Phoenix Park. And now, as he reviewed the things he had seen and felt and apprehended, Malone was content to keep unshared the secret of what could reduce a dauntless fighter to a quivering neurotic, what could make old brick slums and seas of dark, subtle faces a thing of nightmare and eldritch portent. It would not be the first time his sensations had been forced to bide uninterpreted, for was not his very act of plunging into the polyglot abyss of New York's underworld a freak beyond sensible explanation? What could he tell the prosaic of the antique witcheries and grotesque marvels, discernible to sensitive eyes amidst the poison cauldron where all the varied dregs of unwholesome ages mix with their venom and perpetuate their obscene terrors? He had seen the hellish green flame of secret wonder in this blatant, evasive welter of outward greed and inward blasphemy, and had smiled gently when all the New Yorkers he knew scoffed at his experiment in police work. They had been very witty and cynical, deriding his fantastic pursuit of unknowable mysteries, and assuring him that in these days New York held nothing but cheapness and vulgarity. One of them had wagered him a heavy sum that he could not, despite many poignant things to his credit in the Dublin Review, even write a truly interesting story of New York lowlife. And now, looking back, he perceived that cosmic irony had justified the prophet's words, while secretly confuting their flippant meaning. The horror, as glimpsed at last, could not make a story, for like the book cited by Poe's German authority, a last thick act lesson, it does not permit itself to be read. To Malone, the sense of latent mystery in existence was always present. In youth, he had felt the hidden beauty and ecstasy of things, and had been a poet. But poverty and sorrow and exile had turned his gaze in darker directions, and he had thrilled at the imputations of evil in the world around. Daily life had for him come to be a phantasmagoria of macabre shadow studies, now glittering and jeering with concealed rottenness, as in Aubrey Beardsley's Best Manner, now hinting terrors behind the commonest shapes and objects, as in the subtler and less obvious work of Gustave Doré. He would often regard it as merciful that most persons of high intelligence jeer at the innermost mysteries. For, he argued, if superior minds were ever placed in fullest contact with the secrets preserved by ancient and lowly cults, the resultant abnormalities would soon not only wreck the world, but threaten the very integrity of the universe. All this reflection was no doubt morbid, but the keen logic and a deep sense of humour ably offset it. Malone was satisfied to let his notions remain as half-spied and forbidden visions, to be lightly played with, and hysteria came only when duty flung him into a hell of revelation too sudden and insidious to escape. He had for some time been detailed to the Butler Street station in Brooklyn when the Red Hook matter came to his notice. Red Hook is a maze of hybrid squalor near the ancient waterfront opposite Governor's Island, with dirty highways climbing the hill from the wharves to that higher ground where the decayed lengths of Clinton and Court Streets lead off towards the Borough Hall. Its houses are mostly of brick, dating from the first quarter of the middle of the 19th century. And some of the obscurer alleys and byways have that alluring antique flavour which conventional reading leads us to call Dickensian. The population is a hopeless tangle and enigma. Syrian, Spanish, Italian and black elements impinging upon one another, and fragments of Scandinavian and American belts lying not far distant. It is a babble of sound and filth, and sends out strange cries to answer the lapping of oily waves at its grimy piers, and the monstrous organ litanies of the harbour whistles. Here, long ago, a brighter picture dwelt, with clear-eyed mariners on the lower streets, and homes of taste and substance where the larger houses line the hill. One can trace the relics of this former happiness in the trim shapes of the buildings and the occasional graceful churches and the evidences of original art, and the background in bits of detail here and there. A worn flight of steps, a battered doorway, a wormy pair of decorative columns, or pilasters, or a fragment of once green space with bent and rusted iron railing. The houses are generally in solid blocks, and now and then a many-windowed cupola arises to tell of days when the households of captains and ship owners watched the sea. From this tangle of material and spiritual putrescence, the blasphemies of 100 dialects assail the sky. Hordes of prowlers and real shouting and singing along the lanes and thoroughfares. Occasional furtive hands suddenly extinguish lights and pull down curtains, and swarthy, sin-pitted faces disappear from the windows when visitors pick their way through. Policemen despair of order or reform and seek rather to erect barriers protecting the outside world from contagion. The clang of the patrol is answered by a kind of spectral silence, and such prisoners as are taken are never communicative. Visible offences are as varied as the local dialects, and run the gamut from the smuggling of rum and prohibited aliens through diverse stages of lawlessness and obscure vice to murder and mutilation in their most abhorrent guises. That these visible affairs are not more frequent is not to the neighbourhood's credit, unless the power of concealment be an art demanding credit. More people enter Red Hook than leave it, or at least than leave it by the landward side, and those who are not loquacious are the likeliest to leave. Malone found in this state of things a faint stench of secrets more terrible than any of the sins denounced by citizens and bemoaned by priests and philanthropists. He was conscious, as one who united imagination with scientific knowledge, that modern people, under lawless conditions, tend uncannily to repeat the darkest instinctive patterns of primitive half-ape savagery in their daily life and ritual observances. And he had often viewed with an anthropologist's shudder the chanting, cursing processions of blear-eyed and pock-marked young men which wound their way along the dark, small hours of morning. One saw groups of these youths incessantly, sometimes in leering Virgils on street corners, sometimes in doorways playing eerily on cheap instruments of music, sometimes in stupefied dozes or indecent dialogues around cafeteria tables near Borough Hall, and sometimes in whispering converse around dingy taxicabs drawn up at the high stoops of crumbling and closely shuttered old houses. They chilled and fascinated him more than he dared confess to his associates on the force, for he seemed to see in them some monstrous thread of secret continuity, some fiendish, cryptical and ancient pattern utterly beyond and below the sordid mass of facts and habits and haunts listed with such conscientious technical care by the police. They must be, he felt inwardly, the heirs of some shocking and primordial tradition, the sharers of debased and broken scraps from cults and ceremonies older than mankind. Their coherence and definiteness suggested it, and it showed in the singular suspicion of order which lurked beneath their squalid disorder. Had he not read in vain such treatises as Miss Murray's Witch Cult in Western Europe, and knew that up to recent years there had certainly survived among peasants and furtive folk a frightful and clandestine system of assemblies and orgies descended from dark religions antedating the Western world, and appearing in popular legends as black masses and witches' sabbaths. That these hellish vestiges of old Turanian Asiatic magic and fertility cults were even now wholly dead, he could not for a moment suppose, and he frequently wondered how much older and how much blacker than the very worst of muttered tales some of them might really be. So ends part 1 of the horror at Red Hook. In episode 2, Detective Malone encounters horrors as he looks into cult activities in Red Hook and their mastermind, Robert Suidam. We currently release at least 3 episodes a week, more on weeks when we release a complete version, so check the channel page for more stories. Link above. If you enjoyed the tale, it helps us a lot if you let others know, so please click the like button. Subscribing will let you travel with us on future adventures, with the bell notifying you as we set off. If you want to join our band of intrepid explorers of the unknown, come visit us on Patreon. There we have a Discord server where you can share in the discussion about the stories told with both myself and the other members, and even join the book club. There will be behind the scenes content, early access content, and options to guide which stories are chosen as the membership grows. There are even tiers to get your own stories produced, and a free tier if you just want notifications and updates. YouTube memberships will follow when I have enough subscribers. If you subscribe, it will help. But please only join if you can afford to. Let me know in the comments if there are any specific stories you would like to see portrayed in this format. I'm even open to suggestions on how I can improve the content. I try and reply to every comment, so your input will not be ignored. See the description for details of the Patreon, our other social media pages, and for a link to Canje Studios to find out about Arkham horror board games. Click on the end screen to subscribe, go to the next story in the series, or to hear about the Call of Cthulhu. Until next time, farewell. But remember, listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make.